Okay, so here we are looking at Serpentine to map of Africa. This is a really nice little beginner cross country. It's only about 5 kilometers. There's only 2 crossings you have to worry about. So let's dive into it. So looking at the Serpentine launch over here, we can see that it's a nice bowl. And if we put the orientation back to face north and we tilt it a bit less, you can see that there's a ridge line along here and there's another one along here. So ideally for this cross country, if we're flying towards the southwest, we want the wind to be slightly southeast so that we're getting the benefit of this ridge line and then a little bit of a downwind when we head towards map of Africa. Some things to note about the Serpentine launch. First is that it's very shallow, the takeoff. You really do take off over here and you scrape the first few bushes on the way over. So unless there's a wind blowing up the face, you really don't want to be taking off at Serpentine because there's a good chance you'll be digging your glider out of the bushes over here. Second thing to note about Serpentine is there's no bottom landing area. The official bottom landing area is the road over here, this dirt road. The best spot to land is about 50 meters away from this crossroads in this section over here. That's because there's no trees over here, there's no power lines, and you have the most open road. If you keep going along here, you can see it starts getting treed in very quickly, and that's not where you want to find yourself. So again, Serpentine's a great site, but you want the wind coming up the face, and you want to make sure that your spot landing is more than acceptable before you attempt to take off should you end up bottom landing over here. Okay, some other things to note about this site. So like we said, the wind is going to come mainly from the southeast is what we're looking for. On the day that we flew, it moved a bit east, but it's not a problem. And really, there's normally a thermal that fires about over here. There's another one that tends to fire about over here. And then normally there's something above the houses over here. Now, obviously, you know, on the day it could be anywhere, but that's the general place. So on this flight, I actually took off and I flew over here. I got up nice and high. Well, not too high. I decided to come over here to look. I got up high above the houses, but then I came back to this thermal for the crossing and worked it before I took off. So let's have a look along the ridge itself and we'll have a better view of the crossing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have to get up. We're going to have to cross this little valley here. Now, intuition would tell you that you want to go saw this face next, but in actual fact, this is not the best option because this face isn't particularly steep, and also the only landing option really is down here at this crossroads or in this campground, both of which are upwind. And if the wind is east, then you're going to be in the rotor coming into this. So on this day in particular, we want to get up and we want to get as far as possible closer to this ridge line over here. Bottom landing options, so there's this crossroad, there's the campground, which is not the best place to land. There's this area here, which is actually better as a landing option. There's less people, there's less trees, it's a bit easier to approach, so that's a great option. Continuing along, so we've got the ridge over here. You can see there's sections of the ridge that are not very steep and there's sections that get steeper. And remember, today the wind is not coming straight up the face of this ridge, it's coming a little bit across. So things like these little valleys in behind here is not where we want to find ourselves. Another landing option is this field over here. But again, you have to really trust your spot landing if you want to put the glider down over there. And then continuing along, you won't see it in this video, in this photograph, sorry, but there's a beach over here and there's another beach over here. There's a wilderness common and there's the main beach over there. In terms of climbing options, so you can see this ridge is pretty uniform, but there are these little sort of mini valleys. Again, if the wind is blowing along this ridge, you really don't want to find yourself in these bowls behind a line where there could be rotor. So it's good to look for sections that are poking out into the prevailing wind. So for instance, this little buttress over here is poking out into the prevailing wind. It's proud of the rest of the ridge, so that'll work nicely. And if we continue along, you can see over here, there's another little buttress here that pokes out. And again, that's not really behind anything too bad over there. This is also the start of the second crossing we need to make. So at this point here, you need to be high enough to make the glide over Wilderness Village, and then you can pick up the ridge line to map of Africa over here. This is the route that I chose to take, sort of just soaring in along, looking for little bits of lift, and the flights I've done is sort of the minimum heights that you want to have to be doing this. Okay, it's a lovely cross-country flight, and you can see in the video it only takes about 12 minutes to once you're up out of the first bit of lift here to just make the crossing. So it's super easy. There is usually some thermals over this flatter area here, but you have to have the altitude to get up, find the thermal, and if you don't find it, possibly get back. So you're more than welcome to go looking for them here. It's completely up to you as a pilot to make those decisions. Looking at the topographical map here, you can see it offers a bit more insight into the actual takeoff topography here. So you can see again, this bowl really does need exposure from a southeast wind to work properly. And again, even if the wind's a bit east-southeast, this will still work. However, some of these become a bit more complicated. Not impossible, not necessarily too dangerous, just more complicated. Okay, so here we are, we've just taken off, we've made that climb like I said, and you can see the takeoff there behind me. So I'm not particularly high above the takeoff, but high enough that I think we can start making this first crossing. I am pointing out a little bit more towards the sea here because I'm hoping to find maybe some thermic lift over this campsite. And I've got the campsite and the one beyond within my glide as a landing option. Just checking my radio still there. All is good. Okay, so again, I'm not going to stick to the ridge to my right. I'm going to try rather look for thermic lift over this little floodplain here, because the ridge isn't particularly steep, and if I go there and there's no lift, then I'm destined to land at the crossroads, which is now behind me. Looking at emergency landing zones here, I've written off the one to my left and I've got the one ahead of me just beyond my feet. That little green patch there is my current option as a landing zone, and it's well within glide. And again, the air is quite active here, nothing crazy, just I'm looking for a good solid bit of lift.
Yes, Matty! Look at that thermal, my boy.
So Matt, who's flying beyond me, has just found himself a nuclear thermal. You can't actually see him in this video, but you'll see him later to check the height he's got to. So here I am trying to maximize my glide. I've still got the option to my left as a landing, more than capable of making that. And I'm starting to creep a bit towards the ridge now because it's getting a bit steeper. And I'm hoping that in lieu of the lack of thermic lift that I've been looking for, I can maybe find something on the ridge here. So there's a little building site to my right underneath me, which is a nice contrast to the rest of the ridge. I'm hoping that's going to fire. Also, this ridge faces into that east-southeast wind, and sure enough, I'll make a turn it and see if it's usable. Yeah, a little bit of a bump there. Okay, so now beyond my feet, you can see there's a little patch of green. That's now my landing zone. I've abandoned the one behind me. I can glide there easily downwind. It's not a problem. So now I can make my way over to the steeper part of the ridge and hope that we can pick something else up. Again, I found something else here. Nothing wild, but enough to make a couple turns and get a little bit more altitude in. So we could probably stick around and work this lift for a bit longer if we wanted to. But I'm feeling that I have enough altitude now to continue along the rest of the ridge. So all I'm looking to do here is make sure that I have 2 landings within glide so that I can swap from the first to the second. So again, I've got the one to my left, which we're passing now. and I know that I can make the first of the beach options from here, probably the second one with a bump along the way without a problem.
Matthew Ashwell has gone supersonic, everybody.
So that is Matt, who found that nuclear thermal, and as you can see, he's just below the airspace limitations that we have on the site, but he found a fantastic thermal further back, and he's enjoying a world-class view of the Wilderness coastline. Okay, so I now have both beaches within glide quite easily. So landing options, we've got plenty. Obviously, I'd prefer to land on the big sand spit because it's less adjacent to people's properties. But worst case scenario, I could turn to my left and land on that little beach over there. And there is a road which makes recovery a lot easier for my recovery driver. And I'm just getting onto this sort of section behind the road where the trees add a little bit of steepness to this ridge, and I'm hoping to pick up some bumps along the way. Importantly, now we're starting to approach this bit that pokes out into that east-southeast wind. There's a rock to my right here which I'm hoping is going to be a thermic trigger, so I'm going to make some turns here. I'm not going to go too far into this little bowl because I obviously don't want to tempt the wind that's creeping over the tops of the bushes. The wind's not particularly strong at this point. It's just enough of a breeze. So I'm hoping that the rock and this little steep section that I'm flying towards now and turning in front of are going to add a little bit of thermic lift to the equation, so I'm not just soaring ridge lift up and out. But now I have the Wilderness common within my glide, I have the beach, that little sand spit there within my glide. So in terms of landing options, we no longer have to think about where we might land. That's an easy answer now, lots of space. So now the only task is to find enough altitude here to make the crossing over Wilderness Village, and we're just going to keep soaring between these 2 points here until we're high enough to make a 360 if it's thermic. If it's like this where you're definitely using some ridge lift, it's better to just keep soaring and stay in the lift band rather than trying to turn too early, because the 360 becomes a circle which takes you out of the lift band. Whereas if you're going backwards and forwards like this, you can keep your glides in the lift band, you can make your turns in the lift. It's just more efficient at lower altitudes in ridge lift to keep flying like this. And then when you hit the thermic lift is when you can start doing the 360s to stay in that sort of circular column of air rather than this long stripe of ridge lift. So we're climbing up slowly here. I'm now going back to that rock and I'm going to start turning above it to see if it's going to provide thermic lift. The air is quite active here. You can see obviously it's less stable because of the wind direction as well. Normally pure ridge lift with the wind coming up the face would be a lot smoother than this, but it's not a problem. And you can hear from the Vario, we're starting to get in some decent lift now. So on the radio right now, there's somebody else about to launch, and she's deciding not to launch because the wind is too east. So in the time that we took off to now, which is only about sort of quarter of an hour, the wind shifted from southeast to far enough east that people don't want to take off, just to illustrate how much the wind's coming along this ridge. So here I am still working this little bit of lift, and as soon as I feel like I have the altitude to make the crossing, I'm going to point for that ridge line and go for it. So trying a 360 here in the lift, and again we could sit around and work this thermal to the very top if we wanted to, the same way that Matt did. But for me at this point, if I know that I have the goal within glide, I may as well take the glide, and I think that's what I'm about to do. Correct. Okay, so again now I'm feeling that I'm pointing, I can make the landing, the common below me is obviously an easy landing if I have to, but the beach is also within glide now from what I can feel, and again pointing slightly downwind.
Christ, man, I thought you were going to fly to Cape Town there, bro. Yeah, I had to find that nuclear thermal you were in. I hope I can ridge saw my way up for a top landing, otherwise it's going to be very embarrassing.
So again, I can see this paraglider's up at Map of Africa. So had there not been anyone up, I would have gotten as high as I could and then come in above the takeoff. But knowing that there's people soaring and top landing means that there's definitely an abundance of ridge lift when we get there. So even if we come in below the takeoff, we can make it. So here we are. This part of the ridge is obviously much more uniform, so the airflow is more stable, and I've got the beach within glide, and now it really is just a case of soaring it into Map of Africa.
How do you feel about a top landing and a high five? What if you're talking about?
So landing options are abundant now. This is a very familiar sight. You can see the gliders in the video now that are up and soaring. So we know that even if we come in low, there's more than enough that we can make it onto the top. And again, I was sort of trying to do this video as quickly as possible, well, this crossing as quickly as possible, and understand what the minimums are, so that if you're watching this attempting the same thing, you can reference yourself and know if you're higher than where I've been when doing these crossings, you should be absolutely fine. Okay, now we're just going to join the traffic pattern at map. And again, there's some spots at Map of Africa where there's always lift, this buttress being one of them, especially in the south, in the east-southeaster. And now we have the altitude to come in for the top landing. And I'm opting to land nice and low. So you can land anywhere you want at Map of Africa. The best spots are either the very top or the very bottom of the landings field, which is where I've landed here. The rest is actually quite a steep slope. If you're an inexperienced pilot, definitely opt for one of those two. The bottom being probably the easier one, given that there's a little lee from the wind and a bit of sink. I'm too lazy to carry my glider here, so I'm just kiting it to pull me up the hill. But you can see Matt is trying to set up to land above me, but because it's a hill, he's going to end up gliding past me and landing in the same spot as me. So where you choose to land at Map of Africa really is up to you as a pilot. I normally land at the very top.
You can see why I landed at the bottom, eh? You can see why I landed at the bottom. Just go a bit further and put a proper swoop in. Commit to a swoop.
And there we go. Matt's down as well in the sink.
Love that.
Mission completed.